Well, welcome along to the Sporting Life Timeform preview of the Randox Grand National, the biggest race of the season, in association with Paddy Power and David Orr, joined by Phil Turner and Ben Linfoot to look at the big race. And Phil, we've seen a few Grand Nationals over the years between us. Is it fair to say it's a race that's changed in nature in recent seasons?
Yeah, it has. We've had a decade now of the modified fences. We all know the reason why they're brought in. They are safer, and it's just a different shape to the race. I think in the last 7 years we've had 2 novices win the race, and you had to go back to 1958 for the previous novice, so that's clearly a change. And yeah, I think you're still going to get your sort of same number of Aintree specialists, and that's sort of been played out in the other races over the fences. The same sort of horses figuring prominently in the Grand Sefton, the Beecher, the Topham. But when it comes to the National itself, you're dealing with sort of top end talent, and they probably won't dominate quite so much.
So we can forget older horses. It's not one for the old gunslingers now.
Oh, I wish it was as simple as that, Dave. No, I think a lot of the old timers will still come into their own, and again, part of that might be down to sort of the new shape of the race. It's actually run over a slightly shorter trip now because they made the run to the start, the first fence, shorter for safety reasons. It's 4.25 miles instead of 4.5. But there's definitely an argument. It's more of a stamina test, because old-fashioned nationals, you get a load of no-hopers blazing off on the first circuit. You get to halfway, often over half the field was out of the race by that stage, and there'd be sort of a regrouping stage as they went out on the second circuit. That tends not to happen now. You normally, by halfway, there's often 30 plus horses still going. So there's never really a break in the pace. It's an even gallop. It might not be a breakneck gallop, it's an even gallop the whole way around. So that means you're getting horses who are going 8-9 minutes without having a breather. And if you think back to last year's race, there was still about 10-12 still in contention on the home turn, and then all of a sudden the petrol gauge ran empty on a fair number of them, and the stronger horses, which tend to be the older horses, their stamina kicks in at that stage. So there's a fair number of the older brigade who still make plenty of appeal in this year's race.
Well, let's have a look at this year's race. Let's get the Timeform ratings on screen, Ben. It's obviously a competitive race, it always is. This is a high quality one. A horse with a P at the top of the Timeform ratings.
Yes, Corach Rambler, 185p, and that's probably largely because he's £10 well in, isn't he, on official ratings in this race, after winning the Ultimate Handicap Chase for the second year running at the Cheltenham Festival, a feat in itself. And you can absolutely see why he's found his way to the top of the betting and the top of the ratings there. But as you can see, there's 4 or 5 or 6 horses rated just behind him in the 180s, and it is there's a few horses well in at the weights, but we know it's going to be really competitive. I don't think, is going to run away with this race.
Phil, we're going to start our videos by looking at Noble Yeats winning the race last season. He might start favourite. We're recording this on the Thursday. The money is coming in for Noble Yeats. He's challenging for favouritism, much higher in the weights. Any chance of him repeating this win from last year?
Oh no, there is a big chance. I mean, you look at this was a good renewal of the National. There's lots of Grade 1 winners littered about in the mix there, and look how far the front 2 have pulled clear of them. Now, clearly he was a handicap blot on this day, but what he's done since then, he's developed into a Gold Cup performer. He finished 4th in the Gold Cup, and yes, he was badly outpaced at a vital stage. Looked like he was going to be tailed off at the top of the hill. Look how he flew home. Now, there's a slight danger, I remember saying at the time, that he might have left his Aintree chance behind a bit there, because he must have had a hard race. But the way he shaped on all of his starts this year with the improved form, you just know that the Aintree famous long run is just going to suit him down to the ground, and I think he's a huge player. Even though, strictly speaking on the ratings, he's got a bit defined off that higher mark, but you just know that the race is going to play to his strengths.
And we've got the video of Corach Rambler at Cheltenham winning. You touched upon it with the Timeform ratings. This was an improved performance. A handicap, if you could have another go, would do. What concerns would you have about Corach Rambler on this evidence at Cheltenham going into Aintree, if any?
Well, there are a few concerns. I mean, he is a hold-up horse, and even though he's done it in a 20-runner handicap at the Cheltenham Festival twice, the Grand National is a different beast, even now in the modern National, I think, in terms of big field handicap chases. So, the way he's ridden, he could find trouble at some stage. Also, when he hits the front, he doesn't do an awful lot, does he? He throws his head about a bit and he can idle. And when you've got that long running at Aintree after the elbow, I mean, if Derek Fox is on him, hopefully, he's chopped up, we expect him to ride. It could be a hell of a spectacle watching him try and nurse Corach Rambler home.
Fascinating, isn't it, Phil, that this horse is upwardly mobile. He's definitely got his quirks, but even Lucinda Russell's somebody who knows how to win a Grand National. She
does, and I agree with a lot of what Ben's just said there. Look, clearly he's a horse who's got a lot going for him. He's still upwardly mobile profile, and as we know, he's well in. But I share those concerns about the sort of the way he's going to be ridden. Now they managed to do it once with One for Arthur, and brilliant ride. And I suspect we know they're going to try and adopt similar tactics. But if you think of One for Arthur, I think he ran 4 times in total over the national fences. The other 3 times, you were left with the impression, well, those tactics didn't work. Yeah, right. He was always left with too much to do and finishing with running left. So it worked once, and it might fall in a race where it works again, and there's sort of a pace collapse at the right time when he's making his move. But it's just at the prices. I mean, if you think of Le Milos, who's another British trained runner, they've got similar chance form-wise, but one's probably about 3 times the price. And I think he's going to be given a ride up with the pace, which tends to sort of serve you well around Aintree. So I think it's the combination of the fact he's so short in the betting and those slight concerns about the sort of way he's going to be ridden.
Let's look at the Glenfarclas Chase at Aintree. If you're one of the tens of thousands, is it hundreds of thousands yet? I've read my horse by horse preview on Sporting Life. You'll know I've tipped Detla Work for the National. Here he is, Phil, beating Galvin at Cheltenham. Both big players for Gordon Elliott.
No, absolutely. I mean, and look, this just shows how, Gordon Elliott, he's always coming up with different ways of going about it. All of his sort of Grand National horses have come via this cross-country chase. Silver Birch warmed up for it when finished second. Obviously, Tiger Roll. And I remember, I think Bless the Wings was placed in it and then was placed at a huge price at Aintree. So he's got the first 2 here. Look, these were Gold Cup horses in the not too distant past. Proper sort of Detla Works won 5 Grade 1s, and he's here off a mark of 159. I think it's a bit of a shame Jack Kennedy's not riding it, but Keith Donnelly, you've got a good tune out of him there. I'm sure he's going to be in the mix. Famous last words. He got too far back early on in last year's race. I'm sure they're going to try and sort of keep him handy. And if that happens, he just had to use up too much petrol to get involved from a bad position. If things go a bit more swimmingly through the race, I'm sure he's going to be one of the strongest stayers in the closing stages, and his stamina will kick in. And I think he's a class horse, and he's well handicapped. Whereas some of the others, like Galvin, they've got a mark reflecting their old form as opposed to what they've done more recently. So I think Detla Work I'm very, very keen on.
Yeah, well, Galvin has to give him £7, doesn't he? And they were off levels there. So even though he's a dead interesting horse for Davy Russell, perhaps his last ever ride, he's got work to do in the handicap.
We've got some videos now of horses that we like. We've got the Bobby Joe next. So it's been a good trial in Ireland, or in recent times, for the Grand National. A horse you like in this running is Vanillier. Tell us why.
Yeah, well, I just thought he's... look, again, we're talking about sort of lots of these horses have got back class to draw on. He was a Grade 1 winning hurdler in his day. That looks like last year's renewal, so that'll be interesting if those come in there, because that's any second now who obviously ran so well in the race. So that just shows, I mean, last year's race, they target this race, the Irish Yards, because it's always run the first weekend after the weights come out, yeah. And that was the thing. Vanillier, for the most part of this winter, I think they gave him an operation on kissing spines. They think they've got him back to his best, and it's all been about getting him ready for Aintree. They protected his mark, and then he revealed himself in a very, very eye-catching run. Second to Ken Boy, who's since retired. And if you think there was an outsider close-up, which he sort of he puts a bit of a question mark on the form, but way back were carefully selected and Pencil Full of Lead, who finished first and third in the Thyestes. So it looks pretty strong form. It could be rated higher. We know he stays well from his days back over hurdles, and as I say, he's off a mark of 147. That could be very, very lenient. So he's definitely a player, but the big fancy prices have gone now.
You did very well there, Phil, spotting that was last year's renewal. That was superb work.
Ben, we've got the Paddy Power Chase, always one of the most competitive handicap chasers in Ireland. Deep races ever. And there's a horse running in this that you like, one of your lively ones.
Yeah, it is a race that is always really competitive, and Minella Times was second in it, of course, a couple of years ago before he won the Grand National. So I think it's always a race to watch with Aintree in mind, since Henry de Bromhead targets it, and you've got a few horses in here who run in the National. Ain't That a Shame in the Robcar colours, just hitting the front there. You've got Gabby's Cross in the Roger Brookhouse colours towards the stand side, and DL Kerr as well in the Jigginstown silks, and all three have got interesting chances. Rachel Blackmore obviously on Ain't That a Shame, who has since won just a small beginner's chase since this performance, and he's been tipped up by a lot of people. I think with Rachel on as well, he's probably going to go off a good deal shorter than the 20-1 currently available. But Gabby's Cross, you saw there in the light blue silks, running on at the end, shaping as though he's going to really thrive over further, and he did it at Naas as well on his last start, and I just think the trip might squeeze a little bit more improvement out of him. And from the bottom of the weights at a big price, I thought he might be an each-way play.
For our final video clue before we get the selections, it's the Covell Trophy at Kempton. It's a horse called Our Power, and despite appearances, I wasn't around for the last Welsh train winner of the National. That was 1905. Any chance, as a proud Welshman, that we could be seeing a Welsh winner this time around?
Well, he's a hugely likeable horse, it should be said. He's not the biggest, but he really tries for you. And he comes here on the back of 2 valuable handicap wins, so he's fairly used to the hurly-burly of a big race. The trip's a bit of an unknown, but as you see in this, it's stamina won him the day, and he really had to knuckle down. He wanted to win, so these are qualities you want in a horse. And look, from a handicapping viewpoint, he's right in the mix, because this came after the weights came out, so you know he's if it was a sort of a race over conventional fences, you'd be probably even keener on him. But it's a bit of an unknown with whether Aintree will suit and the longer trip. But no, he's definitely, he's got a chance. I think my keener thing, I'm going to try and claim Le Milos is the one I fancy the most of the British trained horses. He used to be trained in Wales, so that'll do for me. I'll claim him.
Cling to that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Every right to. Right, let's make your mind up, Tam. A selection and an outsider from you both. I'll go to you first, Ben. Selection for the Grand National, give us an outsider to go alongside it.
Well, the one I like the most, Dave, is Capodanno for Willie Mullins, and he just looks to me like a well-handicapped horse going into the spring. Obviously missed the Gold Cup with Willie Mullins favouring coming to Aintree fresh following his really good reappearance in the Red Mills chase over an inadequate 2.5 miles. I thought that was really encouraging with a view to him stepping up in trip in the spring. Won at the last 2 Punchestown festivals in April. And you look at that Grade 1 he won as a novice last season, where he beat Lifetime Ambition and Fury Road. He beat them by 6 lengths and a further 9 lengths, and Fury Road's above him in the handicap here, Lifetime Ambition just below him. I just think that's a really good indicator of how well treated this horse could be. He strikes me as a horse who will be fine over the trip. Obviously never gone over the fences. Danny Mullins rides, so there's a few imponderables there, and he's a 7-year-old. Phil was saying earlier in the show about horses that young struggling in the National until just last year, but I think this is the type of profile we need to be looking at now, and that mark of 160 could underestimate his chance, so he'd be my main pick.
Gabby's Cross the outsider?
Gabby's Cross each way for reasons already discussed.
And Phil, your selection in outsider?
I'm going the other end of the age spectrum, because I'll stick with Detla Work. It's a bit of that back class and the sort of proven over the fences. Longer shots, well, I mean, Le Milos and Vanillier, they're both double figure prices, but I guess they're probably not big enough to be saying outsider. If you want one at absolute no hope of prices, 100 to 1 shot, Frankie de Burley, I think he'll outperform those odds. He was actually in the mix with Galvin, Detla Work and Franco de Port, who were Grade 1 horses for much of that cross-country chase. Peter Bowen knows how to win race over the fences. The trips are concerned. I prefer him if he was running in the top them, but I can see him giving you a really good run for your money for an awfully long way, and some of the firms offering sort of, each way to bigger places than 6th, 7th. He might creep into one of those. So Frankie de Burley at a huge price.
Fantastic stuff. Thanks to Phil and Ben for their thoughts on the Randox Grand National, and best of luck with your own bets on the Aintree showpiece.